Hello and welcome to Dyslexia Explored. I'm Darius Namdaran, your host, and today we're going to explore everything to do with dyslexia, ADHD as well, neurodivergence in the workplace, and finding a sense of belonging and exploring this kind of realm, lots of different realms. I've got a fascinating person to introduce you to, Donna Stevenson. It's great to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Darius. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. I've been meaning to have you on the podcast for ages. And I know you're super busy all over the place. So, what I like to do is just start the conversation with helping people understand who you are, what you do, and then we'll go back in time a little bit and just look at your kind of journey with dyslexia and ADHD. I know this is the Dyslexia Explored podcast, but what it's rapidly becoming is the Dyslexia and ADHD Explored podcast because they're so often inextricably linked. Often you get identified with dyslexia and ADHD sitting in the background and the other way around, and they co-occur so much. And the traits, anyway, long intro. Donna, it's great to have you here.
A long intro, but a really good one, Darius. You're right. We both know, don't we, that neurodivergent differences, they do co-occur and overlap. And, it can
Yeah.
happen at different stages of folks' lives as well, isn't it?
Yeah, when you identify it,
Yeah,
absolutely.
for
Yeah.
sure. For sure.
And it's now I was going to ask you, have you got dyslexia?
No, I don't, but I am neurodivergent. I don't tend to speak a lot about myself in these ways, but I'm happy to share that, I identify as having ADHD. So I've been surrounded though by dyslexia all my life, really, Darius. It started with my dad. So that's my first understanding of dyslexia was through him, really.
Oh,
Way back when, obviously, when I was a child. And I'd said to people, and he doesn't mind me sharing this, I've asked his permission. He had real severe literacy issues. And the generation he belongs to, he's in his 70s now. That was a really tough journey for him, to the point when me and my brother then were old enough to be, reading and writing to a good level, a 5, 6. We used to help him with his literacy. It just felt really natural. You know what it's like when you're a child. That's who your mum is, your dad is. And then when he got a little bit older, I suppose that's when I was aware of the word dyslexia. I didn't totally know what it meant then, but I just thought that's my dad. So that was kind of my very early understanding of dyslexia, really. And it was through him, I think, I saw just, the day-to-day struggles of what it means to live in a world that's very dyslexia unfriendly, especially in those days. We're talking about the 1970s, the 80s.
so give our listener an understanding of what you do. What do you get up to? What's your day job?
It's a great question because I'm one of those lucky people, Darius. I absolutely love what I do, and I have for quite some time now. I, I'm going to go a little bit back and then I'll kind of share my journey if that's okay. So, I started my professional life as a nursery nurse and a primary school teacher. So, I was very passionate working with young children. And then I started to be aware that there was learners like, my dad who struggled with literacy. There were these barriers. And so I got interested because I guess of my own lived experience being the child of somebody with dyslexia. I got interested in how as an educator I could try and bring those barriers down. And it was through that I kind of got more and more interested in dyslexia. And then I had a career break to have my daughter, and I went to do a postgraduate course in my hometown of Liverpool at John Moores University. And when I was there, I was on the course with a lady who was just finishing off a project in Liverpool with the British Dyslexia Association. And she was going to step away. And she said to me, and I was looking to get back into work. I was doing like part-time tutoring and stuff like that, but I was mostly at home with my daughter. And she'd said to me, I think you'd be great for this role. There's only 6 months left. It'll give you a taste back into the world of work. It's about dyslexia. And it's in Liverpool. And I thought, great, perfect. So I went for the job, got the job, this project. It was to help all these different local authority teams within Liverpool City Council become dyslexia friendly. And as I say, it was partnership with the British Dyslexia Association. So anyway, I got the job thinking this is going to be a 6-month wonderful adventure. Anyway, as the project was coming to an end, the BDA had got some more funding for another 3 years, and they said, "Donna, do you want to carry on?" I thought, wow, okay, this is a great opportunity. And it coincided with my daughter going into preschool and so on. So I had a little bit more time to concentrate on getting back into work, really. And from there, that was my introduction, if you like, into the world of neurodiversity, dyslexia, of course. And I often say I started at the BDA on the idea that I was going to stay for 6 months, and I stayed for 17 years, Darius,
Wow.
doing lots of different things. And I ended up, I guess, being an educator. I hadn't gone into the BDA initially doing training and so on, but quite quickly they started to ask me to do that once I was working more kind of thoroughly and in depth with the council's teams. So I thought, wow, I'm an educator of children, but here I am, I'm being asked to train adults, and I was absolutely terrified. So I was not very good at it, I think, initially, because I saw it as something very separate to how you are with children. But actually, when I realized, it's kind of the same because you're taking someone on a journey, whether it's a little person or a big person. When I had that kind of light bulb moment, I thought, "Oh, okay," and then I just started to fly. I really enjoyed it. I felt like I was good at it. I think I was good at it. So,
Well, you definitely are good at it because I've been on the other end of some of your training, and it's lovely.
thank
Really,
you.
really good. So, timeline then, 17 years at the British Dyslexia Association.
Yes.
And when did that 17 years end? When did you stop doing that
Oh gosh, I'm
BDA
really
job?
lousy at dates. It was in
Was that about 4 years ago?
2021. Yeah, it was about 2020, 2021.
Okay.
I'd gone part-time because it's a wonderful, wonderful organization, but like any charity, it's full on, and I was getting tired.
Yeah.
I'd gone through all my children's childhood at the BDA, which was lovely.
Yeah.
I used to look after the international conference when I was at BDA, amongst many of the roles I did, and it always used to tickle me that my daughter used to say to me, "Mummy, are you working on the international conference, the IC?" And it was just second nature to her. She was like 5, she knew everything what it was because she was just absorbing it. So it was a real part of our lives, our family as well. And I always remember, I'm sure this is okay to share, but it's quite a sweet little story. I remember I was doing the school run, and Lord Addington is the president of BDA. He's a wonderful person and does so much in the dyslexia world. And I remember being on the school run and my work mobile was going, and I see on the screen it's Lord Addington. And I thought, I better take this call. It was really important. It was about one of the conferences. And I was with my daughter at the time. So I took the call, said bye-bye to him. We're still walking home. And I said to Francesca, guess who that was? And she went, who? And I said, Lord Addington. I was so proud that I'd got this really important person on my mobile. And she like paused and she went, is that somebody from Doctor Who? And it was just, I thought, yeah, get over yourself, Donna. This is not, it's not impressive to your 6-year-old. So it was funny, but it was just a part of our life that I would have Lord Addington on the mobile and, conferences and all the rest of it. But yes, I stepped away because it was like a roller coaster ride. Yeah, about 4 years ago, with the view of kind of going semi-retired. And then Jack Churchill reached out to me. I've known for years, as part of Scanning Pens and so on. He's a brilliant ally in the community. And I think I'd put something on LinkedIn to say, I'm stepping away. I still wanted to do things, but maybe slightly less. And he messaged me and said, Donna, do you want to go on an adventure? And I said, it depends what it is. And he said, there's this thing called Succeed with Dyslexia. We'd love you to be part of it. And I thought, oh, wow, what an offer. I can't say no. So I've been very lucky, Darius. And, now I'm here at Neurobox. I never take it for granted because there's lots of people who, I know struggle with work and don't necessarily enjoy what they do. And I'm in the very, very lucky position that I always love what I do. And in that way, I guess one of the things I want to do is try and give back and help other people in the world of work who maybe are struggling and haven't found their bliss yet in what they want to do and a good fit for them, their niche, I guess is the way to put it.
So you've basically spent the last 20 years helping people understand dyslexia as individuals and helping organizations understand dyslexia and help train people to do workplace needs assessments, understand the tech they need, understand the mindset they need, all sorts of different aspects. You've kind of triangulated lots of different aspects of how to understand the strengths and the challenges of dyslexia in the workplace. So let's really concentrate in on that a little bit. What have been some of your insights, having done that for the last 20 years? What sort of insights are percolating up in your mind at the moment? What's fascinating you right now?
It's a great question because it changes all the time. And that tells you that where we're at now within our culture is changing around dyslexia. And obviously, as you said at the very beginning, ADHD or the other neurodivergent differences as well. I think increasingly one of the key changes over the last few years is that, yes, we talk about dyslexia. We know dyslexia is the highest incidence disability, don't we? And increasingly, the more we understand about it, the more we know that there's more folks than maybe we've ever realised who have dyslexia. They've just not been identified. But I think increasingly we now talk about the other differences as well, neurodivergent differences, whether it's ADHD, autism, and so on, and actually the place dyslexia has within that neurodivergent family. Happily, I think we've also realised that when we get it right for dyslexia, a lot of the time we're getting it right for the other differences as well. A dyslexia-friendly way of working and learning is a neurodivergent-friendly way and a people-friendly way. Something I think that I get asked a lot now, which I guess is kind of new, is this genuine, I think, desire, Darius, of organisations wanting to get it right for their workforce because they want to get the best out of their colleagues. It's gone from something, maybe a decade ago or so, you'd be invited in because an organisation would say, we're aware, under the Equality Act that this is, something we need to figure out how to support individuals around. Please help us to get it right under the Equality Act. And it was very much about an obligation. I
Yeah.
think hearts and minds have been won now by people like yourself. Hopefully, the little bit of work I've done over the years, BDA, all those wonderful organisations, the Helen Arkell, lots of local associations as well, that here in the UK now, I think, we're experiencing a revolution and we've been on this revolutionary road for quite some time around neurodiversity, I think, which is very exciting, very satisfying. We're not there yet. We've still got a way to go. It's important we don't get complacent. But I think the conversations changed, Darius, really, to answer your question, in terms of people feeling that it makes perfect sense. Why wouldn't we do this? To figure out how to work with folks in different ways, in inclusive ways. And beyond now it, becoming an obligation as we used to talk about, it's now, we want to get the best out of folks. And why wouldn't we want to do that? Makes perfect sense, on a human level, but also a business level. And I think that's been the biggest change, really, is the cultural shift around the requests, the conversations that are happening.
Yes. So they've done the sort of return on investment calculation in their mind over time and realize, gosh, I'm going to get better retention if I keep quality people and understand and empower them. I'm going to get more efficiency, productivity out of them if they work in ways that fit their way of thinking. And, culturally, happier people, encouraging other people, mentoring other people, the cascade effects are very significant. So anyone who sort of stopped and done the maths for
Yes, it's a good
just
way of putting
a
it.
few
Yeah.
hours, you start going, I mean, even if you think about it from an employee retention point of view, if you manage to keep an employee on average, you know, 6 months to a year longer than normal because you've accommodated their needs in so many ways that they're blossoming and feel that they belong there and fit there, then, you know, and you do that over a 6-year period and you've got 50 staff, 100 staff, or 1,000 staff, that's immediately thousands and thousands of pounds worth of savings in recruitment costs and retraining costs and all sorts of expensive costs.
Yeah,
I,
definitely.
now, you mentioned something when we were at the dyslexia show together, and that was this concept of belonging.
Oh gosh, yes. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about this thing that's bubbling up inside of you about dyslexia and belonging.
Yeah, thank you for asking this, Darius, because honestly, since I really got my head around it last year, it is bubbling up. I'm so passionate about it, and I'll explain why. So last year, when I was at Succeed, we wanted to celebrate Dyslexia Awareness Time in October. And we come together and said, okay, what theme should we have? We knew that there was the theme of being authentically yourself, which was, around masking and so on. So yes, we wanted to, talk about that. But we were thinking, okay, what can we talk about and go out and deliver free awareness, because it was to celebrate dyslexia time. And I'd said to the guys, why don't we look at belonging? Because I'd seen a lot on social media and we thought, great idea. And it fitted with the idea of, masking. We want people to be their authentic selves. But my goodness, on the back of that, when I went away to research, to put the slides together, essentially, honestly, I had such a light bulb moment. My mind was blown. And I tell you where it started. I found a quote from Brené Brown, and I ended up putting this quote in my slides when I was out and about delivering the talk. And she talked about fitting in is the opposite of belonging. And she talked about belonging is about being the authentic self, your real self. Fitting in was about changing who you are in order to fit in. And it was such a powerful quote for me. It really, yeah, it was a light bulb moment, because I thought, wow, I'd not thought about it in that way before. I always thought fitting in was kind of a good thing. But this quote, and I highly recommend if folks listening to this want to Google it, it really gives you food for thought. And I thought it fitted perfectly into the conversations we have about neurodiversity, about getting it right for folks. Because actually, a lot of the time, what we're asking of neurodivergent individuals is to fit in. You fit in with our systems. And by doing that, I think a lot of the time it comes back to what you're saying about, the business sense. What we want, isn't it, is that people, all the different people within our organizations, are their authentic selves, working to their strengths, thriving and really flourishing. That's really good for our organization, good for the individual as well. With fitting in, if we start to think about it in these ways, what we're asking is you change who you are and fit in with, our way of doing things. And I think what that will bring is a lack of growth. It's somebody then who's fitting in a detrimental way. It means that they're not going to be flourishing. We're not going to access all their wonderful strengths within the role that we've employed them to do. And it will create this disconnect between the person and then the requirements of the role. And I just thought it really inspired me, Darius, because then the more I looked into it, I found these 5 pillars of belonging. And again, it fitted perfectly with, the discussions around neurodiversity. Now, I've written them on a bit of paper because I wanted to share it with you, and I don't
Great.
want to forget any of them. But one is welcomed. So again, if we think about neurodiversity and belonging, what are we doing to welcome people in our organisation? How do we recruit? How do we onboard? The next is known. Are we really trying to get to know who you are in terms of, how we get the best out of you? And how can we do that? By listening to you, having allies who are like you so that you feel comfortable to share with yourself. The other one is included. So this is one of the other 5 pillars. How do we include you within our work? What barriers are we bringing down? Number 4 is supported. And to me, that's one of the easier ones, if you like, because supported to me speaks of what adjustments have we got in place? What accommodations? How, what are you talked about workplace needs assessments earlier. Have we done that with you? Have we figured out how to get the best out of you? So number 4 is supported. And number 5 is connected. So again, networks, ERGs, have we got allies and champions? Do we celebrate awareness times? And those 5 pillars of belonging, welcome, known, included, supported, and connected, again, to me, make the perfect roadmap of how we figure out how we become neurodivergent, dyslexia friendly. And that's a question I get asked a lot by organizations. So for me, this theme of belonging was just like, yeah, it was honestly, I can't stress it enough, a light bulb moment, because I thought, wow, through this idea, we can really, figure out what we do to do right by neurodivergent folks. Happily, I think it was an idea that was of its time, because we were inundated to go and deliver a talk like this. And I was surprised some organizations, now, and this is, obviously totally independent of what we've been doing, but some organizations had that light bulb moment themselves and put into place a belonging policy. So that was really interesting as well. So to me, and as we have this conversation as well, Darius, it's Mental Awareness Week, isn't it? And I think belonging, a sense of belonging, is a really important part of well-being as well. So to me, it's a perfect fit for a lot of the conversations that you would have with individuals or with organizations as well.
Fantastic. Belonging.
Yeah.
Because we all want to belong, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
We
do.
want
We
to
realize it's
belong
important.
to a tribe. We
Yeah.
want to belong to a family. We want to, there's a real hunger inside of us to belong. Fascinating.
It is. Honestly, it really is. I can't tell you. It had a big effect on me last year when I started to research this, because it was, you know what it's like in our line of work, Darius, when you're very people focused and you're trying to get messages across, especially somebody like me, I talk really quick. I'm like, blah, 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 blah. And sometimes I'm thinking, how am I going to try and get this message as clearly as I can, despite sometimes my tendency to talk a lot and get really excited. And so to me, belonging was a lovely, clear package to say, hey, look, this is some really important ideas. And it's a nice, clear way, I think, that we can figure out how we can support folks. And you know what, really interesting, I won't say what organizations, but when I was out and about delivering that information, as I say, I was so impressed by that Brené Brown quote. I ended up putting it in my slide deck. And as you would imagine, some organisations, quite rightly, when you know that you're going to come in and talk, will say, "Can we take a look at your slides?" And we're always happy to do that. Some organisations have said, "Can you take that slide out, please, about fitting in, because we expect everybody to fit in here." And it was a really interesting insight sometimes into the culture of organisations. We're not saying fitting in is a bad thing, because we do want people to fit in and belong. But it was just interesting. I felt with some of those organisations, it made them very nervous that we were talking about fitting in not necessarily being the best way to get the best out of folks, compared to creating a sense of belonging instead.
This podcast is sponsored by dyslexiaproductivitycoaching.com, which helps you organize yourself creatively with a productivity system for Apple devices. Well, let's drill down into that, because there is this dynamic within the workplace where, does the organization fit to you, or do you fit to the organization? And, in the past, organizations were much more like factories, and you were like a component in a system. And if that component doesn't fit within that nut doesn't fit, you swap it out for the nut that does fit, because you need it to fit, and so it's a system. Every business is still a system. Every business is still a process. Every system, a business is still trying to deliver a consistent service, a consistent product for that is better, faster, or cheaper, and it's there to serve the customer or client that's there to serve. And so I can understand from a business owner's point of view where they might be saying, hold on a minute, I'm not here to fit the business round about you, you know, aren't you meant to fit into the right place within the business? And if you don't, I swap you out and move you or something like that. So let's just kind of address this kind of mindset, shall we? And just talk about where it's accurate, where it's helpful, where it's unhelpful. What are your thoughts on that kind of perspective?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think I hear what you're saying. And yes, we have a role to play within our day jobs, don't we? And I think in the analogy that you've used, Darius, yeah, if organizations can get very nervous thinking, hang on, we can't have everybody being mavericks all at the same time. There's got to be some coming together in order to achieve the role that you've been employed to do, the aims of the organization. I don't think that's what it is. I don't think what we're saying is that we want everybody to be all these little rebels, all kind of just doing their own thing and creating a sense of chaos within an organization. I think it's more to do with the individual themselves, how we're working with folks to get the best out of that person to fulfill the role that we've employed them to do. And I think if we take the philosophy of you're going to fit in here only in the way of, in terms of you're going to change who you are, and you're not necessarily, we're not going to work with you in a way that's going to play to your strengths. So, in that context, fitting in, I think it does make poor business sense because essentially you will have employed somebody to do a role to the best of their ability. What I think fitting in speaks of in this context is therefore you're not going to be working with that person in the way that brings out the best in them. And that, I think, that does become problematic then because like you
Yeah,
said earlier about retention, people don't stay.
yeah,
I think also we are in changing times culturally within our world of work. We expect
yes,
more now as employees from our organizations.
yeah,
We've also got, we haven't really talked about this yet, our workforce is changing in terms of the age groups. We've got Gen Z coming through now as new employees. So these are late teenagers, early 20s. We know that Gen Z and Gen Y, our millennials, expect lots of different things from employers than maybe my generation, which is Gen X. And then older individuals, our baby boomers, some of which are wonderful baby boomers, are still in the world of work. There's a generational shift, I think, and there's
yeah.
something that I found out a little while ago, which again blew me away, that I'll share. And I share it a lot when I'm chatting with folks. By the year 2030, so it's only 6 years away now, it's not that far away. 57% of our workforce will be made up of Gen Y, so our millennials, and Gen Z, our young adults coming through. As the normal transition happens, that older folks like me stepping away from work. 50%, we guesstimate, of Gen Z identifies neurodivergent. So
Really?
what's that going to happen? We've got to change the,
50% of
yes,
Gen Z
yes,
reckon they're neurodivergent.
yes.
Wow.
And in 6 years' time, they, alongside millennials, our Gen Y, will make up over half, 57% of our workforce. And
Yes.
when I share that with organizations, as you'd imagine, Darius, I've got the pleasure of working with some very big organizations. They, like your reaction, what? Wow. If they don't know that, suddenly they think, right, to future proof our organization to get to attract the best of the best individuals, a lot of which will be neurodivergent, of course it will. We
Yeah,
need to make sure that what we've got in place is attractive to
yeah,
millennials and Gen Z because we know, and my kids are Gen Z, and I think it's a wonderful generation. What Gen Z talk a lot about is organizations being aligned with their values. To me, they're a wonderful generation who've got the biggest hearts, who really believe that, they've got this moral compass, really, they're an absolute credit to all of us who've raised Gen Zs. And I think they're going to change a lot. They're passionate about the environment and all the other things that we know that are really important to human rights, our LGBTQ plus community. This generation is super passionate about making sure that we treat people with respect. And of course, neurodivergent folks are within that passion as well. And as I say, we guesstimate that about half of them are identifying as neurodivergent themselves.
So let's get really practical. Okay. I think so we've gone on the sort of theoretical, big picture. You've been on this journey over the last 20 odd years, and you've seen dyslexia in the workplace, and there's lots of different accommodations. Okay. And, sometimes people think that we just need to be understanding or be aware, but actually, sometimes you just need practical tools, techniques, and approaches that can unlock a person's unique abilities or enhance those unique abilities. What have you found? You're part of Neurobox now, and Neurobox tell us a little bit about what Neurobox does and so on. Do a little pitch for
Yeah,
Neurobox.
my pleasure. So Neurobox, yeah, they support difference within the world of work disability. So this isn't just neurodiversity, this is also disability beyond neurodivergent differences as well. We do lots of things at Neurobox. So we, of course, deliver training. That's my passion. We also do workplace needs assessments. We help with getting technology for folks as well. We also support with coaching. So lots of the ways that you would expect support to manifest in the workplace around a workplace needs assessment, Neurobox are almost a one-stop shop for that.
Okay.
Also what Neurobox do, and this is something that really got me excited, and I've known about Neurobox, and it used to be Dyslexia Box for many, many years. Ben Lewis, who is its founder, is such a wonderful person. It's about making a difference for the community as well. So yes, we deliver these services. It is this one-stop shop for training and assessment and so on. But it's also about raising awareness, trying to make a difference. So there's a lot of work that we try and do about sharing great practice that we do for free, work that my colleague here at Neurobox, Dr. Deborah Leveroy, will do. She works at policy level and she works at quite a theoretical level, because we know that, and I suppose we've had, we're hinting at it today, Darius. We have these kind of theoretical conversations, a bit like what we're talking about, belonging and so on. And then what that does, we hope, is that it informs the practical things that we're doing with folks. And that's the balance at Neurobox. So work we will do that's more theoretical. It's not just it's a nice thing to do and pie in the sky stuff. It actually informs then what we do at a very practical level. So it's a very exciting organisation to be part of. I always say it's business with a heart, really, and it was really important for me to be somewhere that does have a big heart, because I'm going to quote Gen Z now. I can't be aligned to something that doesn't share my values. It's just the way I am.
Yeah.
So it's important that I'm part of something where I feel like I'm making a difference as well. So therefore, to come back to what you then said about the practical things,
Yeah.
I think the first thing is we need to listen. And I know you're saying about how we are with people. It's not always, the most practical. Maybe it's a little bit airy-fairy. But actually, I think it's really important, because I can't tell you, and this is from my days at BDA all the way through, and I do a lot of free work now. I'm part of the AND network, so that's the Adult Neurodiversity and Dyslexia Network, where we join forces with some of the local dyslexia associations, and we meet once a month in the evening with an expert, all free. And then we stop the recording, we put the recording on YouTube, and then we take questions from people who are asking about job seekers allowance. How do I get a job? Access to work? Worried about my job? Whatever it might be, a safe space. And that's all free. And actually,
We'll put a link in the description
oh,
below to that.
thank you. Yeah, thank you. That means a lot to us. Thank you. And so from all that work, as I say, BDA all the way through now, we're still listening to people all these decades later, quite rightly so. People are still saying, Darius, nobody's listening to me.
Yes.
You know, I said in work, I've got dyslexia. I've been given speech to text software. Really appreciative of it and thank you. But actually, that's not where my dyslexia impacts on me.
Yes.
But nobody's listening, or somebody gave me that 5 years ago and nobody's checked in again since and said, "Hey, is that
Yes.
still working? You're in a different role. Is that still fit for purpose?" So I think we've got to listen to folks. But then on the back of that, there is a happily, there's enough patterns there that we can extrapolate what constitutes great practice.
Yes.
So often what I will say around dyslexia, but for all the differences really, is let's look at how we communicate with you. That's a good place to start. How are you getting your emails? How are you processing your emails? Are we at the very basic presenting them in the right way to you? Are we using a font that you can read? Do you know how to bring down virtual overlays if, a black font on a white background is not good for you? Or if you've got a day job that's full of, some people still do, stacks of papers you've got to wade through, would a reading pen help? I talked about scanning pens earlier. We've got scanning pens, Orcam. There's lots of tools out there that can help. I think I certainly learned during my journey as I was getting my head around all the differences within the community and so on, is that the perfect support package is lots of different aspects all coming together. It's the human to human stuff, it's listening to people, it's technology, it's then still some good old-fashioned Post-it notes maybe, or a fiddle toy, or a change in your working environment, or working, your hours in a slightly different way. I had a really interesting talk at the Dyslexia show where somebody was talking about her journey with ADHD, and she said she found it really tough to start work at 9 because of her time blindness.
Oh, yeah, I was at that talk.
Did
That
you
was
hear
really
Jamie
interesting.
say? And
Yeah.
she said, and I thought, wow, it's such a simple hack, I guess, maybe, but
Yeah.
wow. And she said that they'd figured out, okay, Jamie, you start between 8 and 9. And it was that minor change which made the world of difference for her.
Yes. Yeah, she
And
started at 8 to 9 and she finished between 4 and
yeah,
5, and that half-hour flexibility with her ADHD allowed her to be a little
yeah,
bit late for the
yes,
8:30
that's
and
right.
get there late for 9, and
Yeah,
and then she would work a bit later, or,
it's
and
brilliant,
and
isn't it?
that
It's
that that
brilliant.
was, yes, that's a
And I'd
perfect
never heard that
example of
before.
all of
Yeah,
this happening together, because she had that personal insight. She'd heard that as a suggestion. She thought, "Oh, that would be quite good." She felt empowered by her employer to communicate that with them, and then they say, "Yeah, sure, let's do that." So there's still that kind of, it's quite a nice example of this balance between fitting in and belonging, because ultimately belonging is a form of fitting in. It's like, there's when we're defining fitting in as you have to change your shape to fit in,
yes,
it. But if you say, well, actually my shape is a bit like this, is there space for that here? And you're like, of course there's space for that. We can adjust those times as long as you're here, for those hours, so we can have our meetings together and do this together, and be together and work together. Another form of belonging. Then that's great. And it's a perfect example of that sort of balance.
yeah, it really is. And the thing is, Darius, what message does that give to that person? Because
Mm,
we can use that as a bit of an example, isn't it? If somebody says, "Hey guys, I'm really struggling to get in at 9. I have ADHD. I've got time blindness. It's a real struggle for me," and the organisation just goes, "Well, it's 9, so." And end of conversation. As opposed to, like you say, okay, well, let's figure out, why don't we say, you arrive between 8 and 9. So you're still, like you say, Darius, this person's still present to get on with their work and all the ways that we need them to, be really productive. But it's this accommodation that we've made. It's not cost us anything, but it means a lot to the person. And actually, it stops the issue.
something that's really been on my mind in all of this is, it's really an exercise in design.
Yes.
So you're kind of designing personally, as an individual with dyslexia and ADHD myself, I have to design a life around what I need. Just like I need to get shoes that are designed to fit my feet. And if I don't get shoes designed to fit my feet that are too small, that I just push my feet into those shoes and you go, make those feet fit into those shoes, you're like, yeah, I can fit into those shoes. But after 2 hours of climbing a mountain, they're really sore and bleeding, and I'm not going to make the
Yeah.
journey.
And that's a great
That's the
metaphor, by
analogy,
the
isn't
way.
it?
Yeah, it's perfect. Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we would stop and say, well, hold on a minute. The goal isn't for you to walk in size 5 shoes. The goal is to climb this mountain, go together, achieve this objective, and so on. Let's make sure you've got the right size of feet for the journey, right size of shoes for the
Yeah.
journey. And
Yeah.
in many ways, that's what we're doing as employers, is we're designing an environment to optimize to get the best result for everyone. And it's really a design mindset where that lady was, we should find her name and put a link to her in some way.
Yes,
I don't
I
know.
know who it is.
Do
She's
you,
brilliant. I do. I won't say it because we don't have her permission, but yeah,
all right,
I
okay.
know who
Well,
she is.
we'll we'll
But
get
I'll let
we'll
her know,
connect to her.
Darius,
We'll
that we've
put a
been.
link in the
Yeah.
description to some resource or something if you're
Yeah.
interested.
Well,
Scroll
actually, we
through.
can put a link to information on the dyslexia show because she was a keynote speaker,
Yes, she
wasn't
was.
she?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this whole concept of designing your own system as an individual and designing a system around the individuals and your employees for optimum performance is essentially what we're talking about.
Love
And
it.
if you think about how much in the workplace a business person, you know, we are designing processes and systems to make a business work effectively, consistently, predict. And what a great opportunity with dyslexia, for example, ADHD, autism, because you can predict with quite a high accuracy what the needs are probably going to be in these different realms and what would happen if you don't do it, big downside, and what happens if you do it, big upside. The return on investment is staggering when you
Yes.
sit down and actually figure out from a business point of view what the return on investment is in optimizing a designed environment around those individuals. It's basically like, what tools would fit your mind? What techniques would fit your mind, your way of thinking? So that is involved in your circadian rhythms, maybe. It could even involve your hormonal rhythms. We had a podcast last week where we talked about hormones and menopause and
Yes. Yeah.
dyslexia and ADHD. If there's times when you're super focused, super productive in the month, you just max out on those. And then other times where you just have to ease back and you go into a more inward and less outward kind of mode. It all balances out eventually. It's really about this designing a workflow, a toolkit, and an environment that is fits you,
Yeah. I couldn't agree more.
fits your
I
mind.
love everything you say because, and that's a reflection of you, Darius, because you're so wise around these subjects. It's a pleasure to listen to you. Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I think we are probably at this point in our evolution, in a transitional phase. I think we're going to get to the point, and hopefully it'll be within my lifetime, where we don't need to think so much about this stuff anymore. I put myself out of business. We always used to say that at BDA. BDA was always, one of its remits was that we shouldn't have to exist anymore. you're doing a job that you think one day we shouldn't really need to exist. That's almost the reason you're doing it. So because we all just become dyslexia friendly. So we
Yeah.
don't need people like me to go out and speak about it and so on.
Yeah.
Because we do it as it's just a normal part of how we live
Yes.
and work.
Yes.
Because when you put it like that, and it's so beautifully clear the way you express it, why wouldn't you do that? You know, you've spent time and finance employing somebody that you've seen great talent within and so on, that you think is going to be a good fit for the job.
Yeah.
Why would you then not work with them in a way that's going to get all those wonderful things
Yes.
that you've seen within them when you
Yes.
employ them,
Yeah.
and do something completely different so that actually then they're not being as wonderful as, you would hoped. I always remember I was working with, they were like a sales team. I think they were part of a car company a few years ago. And as I'm sure you're aware, a lot of neurodivergent folks, especially when we're looking at dyslexia and ADHD, are fantastic verbal communicators, great with people and so on. These are some of their great strengths. And this guy who was on one of my sessions, that was how he was saying, I'm really good at that stuff. I love people. I'm a natural salesperson. I'm really good at it. My figures are always high and so on. And he reached out to me afterwards and said, Donna, can you help me? Because the job is changing and I'm being taken away from the bit of the job that I'm really, really good at. I'm being asked to sit behind a desk, crunching numbers and so on. He said, I don't
Yeah.
mind doing that as a small part of the job, but that's the main part of what I'm doing now. And it always stuck with me, Darius, because what he said was, and he wasn't saying it arrogantly, but he said, it's like in a football match. He said, I'm Pele. He said, and they've got me sitting on the bench. So he said, I want to just get out and play. That's what I'm good at. And that was his way of trying to describe it. And as I say, it stuck with me. I thought, what a brilliant way of
Yes.
describing it through football. And it's
Yes.
that mismatch where you think, okay, we get it. Sometimes, you have to do parts of the role that you're not going to be great at.
Yeah.
Let's figure out how we bring some of those barriers down. But then at the same time, with our Pele friend, why wouldn't we have him out most of the time selling? Because that's really what his talent is. He's good at
Yeah.
it and he's bringing in, all what we need for our organization. And it's that I think we're still a bit, well, a lot. I think a lot of organizations are still quite clunky about trying to get that right, where we've got people who've got these great talents and gifts. And we're saying, okay, we get that, well done on that. But now go and do something completely different that you're really not good at, and you won't be doing that stuff anymore. You're going to do something completely different.
Yeah.
To me, it doesn't make good business sense, let alone people sense.
You know what? I was reading this book about a tech company, and what they realized was that very capable contributors that were individually capable, very good, technically capable, practically capable, realized in the company that the only way to progress was to move into management.
Mm.
And so they had to start leaving the technical capabilities behind. And in effect, what we're saying here is he was technically very good at playing football, but then he's being asked to go into a managerial role, manage the team, and so on. He's like, look, I'm not here to manage a team. I'm here to go play the game and get the
Yeah.
goals. And maybe he's not, what's the Apple TV football one? What's his name?
Oh, Ted
He's not
Lasso.
Ted Lasso,
I've
but
not seen that. I've heard
he's
good things about it though.
he's Roy Kemp or whatever. I don't know, but
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, you have to watch Ted Lasso.
I
Absolutely
have had it
fantastic.
recommend, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Even if you
it's
don't like
such a winner.
football though,
Oh,
Darius,
even
you
if you don't
still
like
enjoy.
football,
Oh,
yeah,
okay, yeah, I'll have a
yeah,
look.
yeah. It's
Yeah,
not really about football.
yeah.
It's really about people, and it's just so heartwarming. So, where was I? What was I saying?
Well, what we were saying, and you're right, and maybe I'm going to be provocative now, because what you were saying was that you often have folks doing a role, then they, in order to become a manager, they kind of leave that role behind that they're really good at,
Mm,
love it. And so our Pele salesperson goes off, and he said, I'm sitting behind desk crunching numbers and
yes,
so on. And I wonder, why does promotion often have to mean leave the thing that you love and that you're great at and go and do something now completely different? Why
yes.
can't we be clever enough to think, okay, Mr. Pele, you're going to still do a large part of the time, but also you're going to manage a team. Managing a team doesn't have to look like you sitting behind a desk crunching numbers.
Well, that's what this company had solved. So what they
Ah, okay.
decided was they said there are two career paths. One is the manager team coordinator career path, and then the other one is the individual contributor career path. And what they realized was that people actually wanted agency to make decisions. They wanted to be able to make strategic decisions. And they realized the only people who got that were the managers.
Mm,
So what they ended up doing was saying, look, if you don't want to go down the managerial route, we will increase your level of responsibility and authority and ability to contribute to these team meetings without necessarily being involved in managing the team. So you come in as like an internal consultant
nice.
whose voice is listened to. And so they go up together. And I think that's really quite fascinating because often people with dyslexia, ADHD, neurodivergent, autism, etc., we're on the edges. We're on the edges of the bell curve, and we're on the edges for a reason. And often for there's so many of us and so little of us in that kind of proportion because it's like having salt in a meal. You've got enough to flavor it, not too much to change the flavor, or like yeast in flour to make it rise. There's just this proportion of people within this bell curve. And often we are the people that live where systems overlap. We're attracted to where systems overlap. So if you're a professor of psychology, you'll end up being a professor of psychology, but you'll also be really interested in astrophysics and also interested in biology, and you'll take learnings from that and then incorporate them into psychology, much like if you read some psychology books, they take the natural process of a virus replicating biologically and then apply it to how it can replicate psychologically within a society, viral trends, and all this sorts of things. So we tend to live in those kind of overlapping zones. And we are like hunter gatherer of ideas and solutions and things that people haven't really thought of that are in the middle of it. And so designing around that is incredibly valuable because it opens up so many opportunities to the center ground.
Yeah, I agree. Again, lovely way of explaining it. And I think part of maybe some of the changes that we've been chatting about during this conversation has come about because we've got some neurodivergent folks in manager positions, leadership positions, head of companies now. Hopefully it's easier. It's not perfect yet, but it's getting easier for the neurodivergent community to get in those positions of power. They can be decision makers. And I think that can only be a good thing. And I
Yeah.
think the more that we break down some of those barriers to enable more folks who are neurodivergent to go into those positions of power, again, we'll see, I hope, the changes that we want to see speed up because anybody who's in the community understands why this is really, really important. And as I say, I think I've not read any research about this. It's just my instinct is telling me that some of the reasons we've seen these changes over the years is because neurodivergent folks have got into some of those positions of power and then, change the narrative around what it means to be different in those ways.
And I think it's also to do with what you do, which is to help people understand how their different ways of thinking are affecting them in the workplace as a executive, for example.
Mm,
They go, gosh, yes, I am dyslexic. I thought I left that behind me when I was a child,
yeah,
but I can see how it affects the way I respond to reports or the way I really love it when people put up visual displays in a meeting and I've got something or we all gather around a whiteboard. It seems to all click for me. And I'm going to make sure there's a whiteboard in every meeting room. I'm going to make sure there's, I don't know, mind mapping software available for
yeah,
everyone in the company, or that there's speech to text available and it's okay to send a voice message instead of having to send an email. And there's all sorts of little things.
yeah,
But what happens is when someone like you over the years has gone in and said, did you realize this is part of dyslexia, and you're like, gosh, I didn't realize that was
Mm,
part of dyslexia. And that's part of the journey I've been on for the last 20 years, is since I was 35, realizing, oh my goodness, dyslexia isn't just about my childhood.
yeah,
It's
trust.
affecting me on a
Yes,
day-to-day basis in my workplace, for good, and
yes.
it's interfering as well. And you
Mm.
spot when it's interfering, bad dog. No, 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 we're not doing that. We're not getting caught up in having to read absolutely everything with my eyes. I'm going to put that into a PDF reader and
Yeah,
just listen to that thing. And let's not overwhelm ourselves unnecessarily. I think what happens is a lot of these executives start to unconsciously put in workplace strategies and not realize that it is an actual dyslexia strategy. And when someone like you comes along and says that was a dyslexia strategy, you go, oh my goodness, then they can put it in for other people who haven't stumbled across that yet.
yeah. It's really interesting. I've not thought of it in that way before. Yeah, I think you're right. I think for some, I'm just trying to think it through. I think what's also really useful about training and awareness, and you asked me earlier on what's changed. I suppose this is another change that we didn't used to speak about so much, 20 years ago with the strengths of dyslexia, ADHD, whatever we're talking about. And I think now, well, I know we talk a lot, certainly in anything I deliver, I talk about the strengths. I start with that and then we move on to potential areas of challenge. And I hope what that does is that people feel less scared to share, "Oh, okay, yeah, I've got dyslexia. This might be the first time I'm telling you. I've worked here for 5 years, but now I'm sharing it." Because I hope what, again, we're doing with some of the awareness we raise, and it's not just me, there's wonderful people out there doing all this type of work across the community, is hopefully making it okay to speak about difference. And actually, maybe come even full circle to say, "Do you know what? I'm actually proud of being neurodivergent." I hear more people now saying, "I'm proud of having ADHD." You know, I, if I and I've heard people. I mean, I've heard people say it all. People have said to me, "Donna, if I could take a pill and get rid of my dyslexia, I would." But I've heard people mostly say, "I don't want to get rid of my dyslexia, my ADHD, my autism. I just want to manage some of the areas of challenge because actually, what it gives me is so beneficial that I wouldn't not want to be neurodivergent." And again, I
Yeah.
think that's a change, Darius, and I hope some of the training that we do, because we talk a lot about the positives and get organizations excited about difference, that maybe it also helps a little bit for folks who say, "Right, and now I'm gonna share that I've got autism, I've got ADHD, dyslexia," whatever.
So there's two things on my mind I'd love to talk to you about. Number one is the timeline of dyslexia in a person's lifetime and how dyslexia shows up at different phases of life. And the second one is AI and dyslexia. So let's start with the timeline. Something I really want to talk through and help me think this through. So I've been a primary school teacher. You've been a nursery school teacher. I'm helping people in adulthood with dyslexia, professional strategies for dyslexia and ADHD, and so are you. So if we did like this timeline, I've been thinking about this and seeing when you dyslexia is not a reading difficulty, it's a processing difference that shows up as a reading difficulty, but it also shows up in different ways at different
Yes.
times in your life. And I just thought it might be quite fun as a thought experiment to just go through a timeline of what tends to happen when you're like 4 years old, 7 years old, 10 years old, 14, 20, 35, 45, and just go through some of these key stages in life because it's fascinating to see all these different key stages of life. So, do you fancy going through the timeline?
Let's do it. Yeah, I'll never say no to a challenge. So I can start us off because as I said at the beginning, I've come from nursery nurse, and that goes from 0 to
Yeah.
basically 5.
Yeah.
I think with our babies now, I think before we get going, Darius, I think we need to just put a health warning on this, especially when we're looking at young children. There's lots of reasons why we might see developmental delay in, children under the age of 4. But for sure, if we're potentially that's where dyslexia will start to manifest. There will be a developmental delay in some way. And it may interest folks listening to this that it can be. But as I say, please, anyone listening who thinks, oh my goodness, my baby didn't crawl, they just stood up and walked one day. That means they've got dyslexia. Not necessarily. It's a cluster of things, and it's the severity of how these issues impact. But I'll share it nevertheless. So often you'll hear in the very early years this idea that a baby's not crawled. It's just, one day it's got, as they do, pull themselves up and just started toddling about. So we've got this type of indicator coupled with maybe a little one who is very late to verbalise, shows no interest in little nursery rhymes and so on. All these kind of very early literacy activities we should be trying to do with our preschoolers. We've got little ones who've got no interest in that, finds it hard to follow, not singing back, not verbalizing as they're learning to talk. And I think increasingly now, when we know that there's a language delay, that is something that, our medical profession in the early years are very aware of through health visitor and so on, because it's a red flag for a number of issues if a child is late to talk. That being said, then, also often children will then just suddenly speed up. So we've got to
Yes.
allow for individual development. So we've got some of those issues in the early years. Then as our children travel into the foundation stage, so that 4, 5, it can manifest continuing around literacy. So again, not an interest in stories. Very tricky for them to develop a good pencil grip, learn how to write their name, recognise their name or their little symbol on their coat hook, and all those things that we have our little ones doing.
Tying shoelaces,
Yes, so then it goes into
telling the
getting
time,
dressed. Yes, all
like
those life skills.
remembering their
Days of the week.
clothes,
Yeah,
order, the habits that they're
yeah,
building. You start expecting them to be able to remember how to, brush their teeth, brush their hair,
yeah.
button up their clothes. And because so much of this is a process and they're not necessarily becoming automatic at this
That's
process
right.
because it's a
Yes.
processing difference and they have to be so intentional all the time. And we've become used to people just going into automatic. I've done it 20 times, 30 times, so I've learned the process. Whereas some often these children only start becoming automatic after 100 very
Yes.
careful repetitions until that process starts to become somewhere close to being automatic.
Yeah, you're spot on. And I think often then what you'll also see as a parent or an educator, it's a child that's very bright,
Yeah,
very full of life, full of ideas. But then there's this mismatch with, oh, hang on, this child seems so intelligent. But, when they're sitting trying to have a go at writing their name, wow, there seems to be this discrepancy with what
yes,
I think they're
yes,
potentially capable of to
yes,
what they're actually able to do. And
yeah,
again, a lot of parents will have that instinct about their children. I think years ago, a lot of parents were ignored when they spoke in those ways. Now, happily, our education system's better at listening to parents' voices and carers' voices, saying, you know what, I feel there's something not right here.
yeah,
But actually, what you share about the process, if we scoot forward from 2 years old to 22 years old,
yes,
although we hope by then somebody is tying their shoelaces and so on, the pattern is the same, Darius, whether then we've got somebody who's trying to learn how to drive compared
yes,
to them trying to learn how to do their shoelace. It's something that maybe some of us will only need to do 10 times to figure out what to do. But we know that somebody with dyslexia or some of the other differences will need to do it maybe 200 times to be able to figure out. So we talk a lot, don't we, when we're thinking about dyslexia, about overlearning. And that's a pattern that travels from, as I say, being 2 to 52. It's a pattern that of needing time to be able to go over things so that you get to that sweet spot where you think, right, I've got it now. So
Yeah, so
there's
it's
some
not
things that won't
actually
ever change, I
overlearning.
think. Yeah.
We call it overlearning, but it looks like you're overlearning something,
Yes.
but it's enough learning. It's like,
Yes, good. Yes, you're spot
it's
on. Enough
this
learning.
term of
Yeah.
overlearning is a fascinating term. So from a teacher's point of view, they call it overlearning. And the what overlearning, for those of you who don't know what this means, is overlearning means learning it over and over again until you get it. And so it can feel like you're, and I do this with adults in, I'm teaching them how to use Apple Notes to capture all their thoughts and empty their working memory rapidly. And we're going back through, oh, you click that button over there, you do this, you share this button over and over again. And it feels like you're taking forever, and they feel embarrassed and guilty. And
Yes.
they're like, oh, are you laughing at me? And I'm like, no, 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 I totally get where you're at. Didn't we do this last week? Yes, we did, but it's okay, because
Yeah.
this is part of not having strong automaticity. It's part of your gift. And the gift is you adapt to new situations, and you're always very intentional, very manual and intentional about what you do. But there's some things you just don't want to be manual and intentional about. You just want on autopilot, so you can use that energy on some higher level function. So it's, yeah, so let's go back to the timeline. So if we see this pattern repeating, and that's the fascinating thing that I want to really get to in this timeline, how we see that 22-year challenge, as well as that 5-year challenge or 2-year challenge. It's the same processing style expressing itself differently.
It is. Yeah, it is.
So, so we're at 7 years old, let's say,
Yeah.
and we're
Okay.
learning to read.
Yeah. So again, for some of our kids, going to be a challenge, decoding and so on. So it will be overlearning or enough learning to try and get to that place where now they can decode. Of course, the next stage is we're asking them to, for inference skills, tell us what you've read, answer these questions, read between the lines. So then we've got higher order reading skills. Now, for some individuals with dyslexia, actually, they're quite good at that because that's part of the strengths of reading between the lines, that almost intuition and so on.
Yeah.
But it's then often expressing that. So this is where in that part of our education, in primary education, getting ready for the first, you know, tests that you'll do, SATs and so on. Yeah, it's probably the same patterns, Darius. We're going to see potentially a delay, a gap again. This gap, very bright, potentially person, lots of ideas, maybe excel in some areas of the curriculum, like, I don't know, design and technology, cookery, numbers,
Storytelling,
science. Yeah, but
creative
maybe
solutions.
literacy
Yeah.
is not there, or for some folks with dyslexia, numbers is also an issue, but we've got almost the whole range. Some are really good at number, other not. So we'll see this discrepancy in the
Yes.
curriculum, and that's where then parents start to get really worried because then we're preparing for exams in our primary school, and obviously they know what's coming in secondary school. And again, I think what we start to see there, and happily our schools are better now for all students, is revising and so on doesn't always come naturally to, I think, our dyslexic learners. So we need to teach explicitly these metacognitive skills. How do I think about learning? What works for me to remember stuff? This really reflective learner. Happily, we
And
do a lot now of that with all our children, but it's something that we really need to teach our dyslexic kids, I think.
and I'm going to try and bridge between tools that help them when they're young and also tools that help you in the workplace, because having a calendar and a routine and set times for when things are going to happen and structure in that way is really helpful.
Yeah.
Being told this is what we're going to do, this is the pattern, this is the process, and making that explicit, that also translates over into the workplace, where
Yeah.
one of the workplace accommodations might be, could you just be explicit about the tasks you want done and the process you want to go through, and that we just write it down so that that person can work through the process, rather than just implicitly expect a person to just eventually just get it. And that's another experience, and you're sort of, I'd say, round about 25 years old, that really starts showing up, because in your 20s, early 20s, employers are kind of like, yeah, okay, they're just kind of learning and so on. And then they're starting to say at 25, why are you still messing up some standard operating procedures here? Why are you muddling up the process here? You've done this for like 2, 3 years. Is this not basic stuff? And you're just so competent at what you do, but then some of this basic stuff you're just
Yeah.
messing up, and it's undermining everything that you're doing here. Why are you doing that? Do you not care anymore? And the person's going, I have no idea. I do care, but I don't understand this disconnect. And it's expressing itself in these different stages of
That's
life,
right.
you
It's
know?
fascinating. It's a great question. And it's a great little exercise to think in this way, because that's another version of the gap, isn't it?
Yes,
The
it
gap
is.
that we see with that very bright little 3-year-old who
Yes,
then, when you're asking them to sit and write the name in the sand, is like flummoxed, through
yes,
to the gap with the 30-year-old who's like,
yes,
I'm really good at this, but I don't seem to be getting the promotions. Or, my boss is coming to me saying, why isn't that not as it should
yeah,
be?
yeah.
It's the gap again,
The
isn't
gap.
it?
I love this term, the gap, actually.
Yeah.
That's a really great concept, and just it sums it up. So let's take tying your shoelaces, for example,
Yeah.
okay? Where is the gap in tying your shoelace? So, for example, there could be a kid that's really good at fixing things, and I used to be really great at untying knots, and at like sorting things out, and my mum would put me onto it and I'd sort it all out. But then tying my shoelace, complete nightmare. And you're like, hold on a minute, you're so good at this, that, and the next thing, but this basic process of doing it exactly the right way every time, you're not getting. And then you've got the gap when a child has got this incredible vocabulary, discussing this, discussing that, and talking about onomatopoeias and juxtapositions, and isn't this fascinating? And then you get, oh, that's fantastic, write it down, and saying, this was what happened,
Yeah.
and that's it. And you're like, no, 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 I wanted more. What you said, oh, I can't do that. And there's
Yeah.
this gap, isn't there? And it keeps happening. That's a fascinating way of framing each one of these phases.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I think what we can do as a parent or a colleague, wherever we're engaging with folks through their lives, is to close the gap. And how we kind of do that is through modeling and making connections, especially with older individuals. Or even if we do take the 5-year-old learn to tie the shoelace, if we take what you shared, Darius, somebody who's really good on tying knots and that, is to kind of sit them down and say, do you know what? This is really just like when you're playing with you rope and doing this, that, and the other. Let's have a look and let's do this. So it's that kind of scaffolding and step by step that I think then helps the dyslexic individual to say, oh, okay, me talking about all this wonderful stuff, actually, now I've got a structure with, I don't know, maybe my teachers give me on rather than a blank piece of paper, maybe now I've got some boxes so I can put my ideas in that beginning, middle, and an end. All these things that I'm talking about, I can put it in. Or, of course, use technology to help as well.
Or a mind map.
And I
Yeah,
think, yeah, I think that's some of the ways that we can support, as I say, as parents or
yeah,
however we're engaging, is to help to show, hey, you're really good at this. If you
yes.
take those bits and move it across to here, that area of struggle will no longer be an area of struggle.
Well, I think once you find your way of thinking and the typical solution to that challenge, if it presents a challenge, you can then follow that pattern in all sorts of ways. Let's
Yes.
take tying the shoelace, for example. I only learned how to tie my shoelaces really properly when I was teaching it at primary school to kids. I could tie my shoelaces, but they would always come undone because it was always a granny knot. And there's another way of tying your shoelaces that becomes a reef knot that doesn't come undone. And I reckon about 80% of people don't tie their shoelaces properly. And you can see this, it's fascinating. And when I learned to tie my shoelaces properly, I had to do it by not becoming automatic. I have to look at it and tell myself a story every time.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
these two ears go across each other and then they go round and then they get tucked. And I have to do the same as a sailor. So a sailor has to be able to tie a bowline knot. And a bowline knot is literally a life-saving knot. You have to be able to tie a bowline knot. And I know so many people with dyslexia who cannot tie a bowline knot. They're amazing sailors, but they fumble with a bowline knot. And you can only tie a bowline knot in that scenario for me if I do the story of doing a loop with the rabbit coming out, running around the tree and coming back down
Yeah.
and then tying it. And so there's these techniques where you basically overlay a visual narrative onto a process. So you're not relying on your automaticity within your brain, you're relying on your visual strengths to lead you through a process. And most people don't teach in that way unless they're very practical teachers. Sailors tend to be very practical people. A lot of them are dyslexic because sailing involves so much problem solving. So once you learn that for the tying your shoelace, you know that you can do it when you're sailing as an adult, or there's
Yeah.
maybe another gear shift thing that you've got to learn for other skills.
And I think I love that. I think on the back of that, I think when we get to a certain age, for some of us, we think, I can't do that, teach myself how to tie that knot. I can't say that little story. And you let go of some things, don't you? I always remember when I was doing some tutoring, as I said, I was a stay-at-home mum, but I was doing some tutoring. And a family had reached out to me, worried sick about their 14-year-old daughter because she still didn't know numbers up to 20. So she's 14 years old, doesn't know automatically numbers from 0 to 20. And they were just really, really, as you'd imagine, really worried about her. And so I remember she used to come to my house because we were doing tuition. And I said to her mum and dad, I'm going to take her right back to basics. And they were like, do whatever it takes because she's just got to get this to stick. And I literally had squares of cardboard with the numbers on. I remember putting them on the floor, something that you do well. And again, I'm going to say something you do with a much younger child, but you've got to let go of the stereotypes of this is something you do with a preschool and here I am with a 14-year-old. You've got to kind of let go of all that and just say, right, this is a great way for you to learn. And we got active with it. And that was what she needed for it to stick. And once it was in, it was in. And then she didn't need the cardboard numbers on the floor and playing games with it, throwing a bean bag and all the jumping around that we were doing to try and get it to stick. It was stuck. But because of her age, school won't do that anymore
No,
because with a 14-year-old. And
no,
it was only, in the privacy of some tuition time with me that she
yes,
felt, okay, now I can. But she was embarrassed. But I said, look,
yes,
it's going to be okay. And we did it. And I was playing along with her. We used to have a giggle. And yeah, she
yeah.
got there and it stuck. And then she could build. But because the foundations weren't there, and she was being taught in the traditional way that we would teach a 14-year-old, which is very dry. It just wasn't sticking.
It
And
wasn't
I love that.
imaginative and
Yeah. I love the bravery, I think.
kinesthetic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Darius, of what you say about telling the little story to tie the knot. That's what we
Mm,
need. And I think as, teenagers or adults, we shouldn't be scared of taking ourselves back to things that we would associate with childhood. But why are we thinking that it's childish? It's just a
yes.
better way for our brain to get that information, isn't it?
Well, I think sometimes we regard our imagination as childish.
Yes.
And and actually, yes, it is a big part of childhood, being imaginative stories, made up stories, and so on. And then we think that adulthood is about moving into the world of facts. But actually, what you realize is the inner world of a lot of people with dyslexia, a lot of people with ADHD, they are translating the world they're seeing into an imaginative realm, a construct. They might even turn it into a Dungeons and Dragons type scenario to start understanding the pattern of how things work, or they might start creating memory palaces of,
Nice.
I'm just
Yeah.
imagining this person stuck on the wall on this big bear over here, and that stuffed badger in that corner, and my mum's painting in that corner over there, just to start
Yeah.
associating and make silly pictures up and so on. But that's actually how world memory champions brains
Definitely.
work
Yes.
to
Yeah.
actually memorize things.
Yeah.
So I think so often we've been taught to leave our creativity at the door of the classroom, and to also leave our creativity at the door of the boardroom, that once an environment allows you to bring that creativity into your workspace, again, it's another accommodation in a way, because have you noticed this with a lot of entrepreneurs? They will start talking in pictures. Okay.
Mm.
So if they don't have a whiteboard and to draw something up on, they'll just go, oh, Donna, it's a bit like sailing. When you're sailing and this happens and that happens and this happens, and you're like, well, I don't really know sailing, but I can imagine it. Well, this is what our business journey's like
Yeah.
here. We're at the stage where we're like docking at the harbor. And if we don't get that tied up in the right place, we don't tie this down well, and we're sleeping at night and the waves come in, we might bash against the side and wreck what we've got. So I'm really concerned that we've got to tie this up somehow. And the person goes, right, I get what you mean. Okay, that's where you're coming from. And so they're speaking in metaphors,
Yeah.
in images. And so when you see people in a boardroom saying it's like this and it's like that, they probably got dyslexia
Mm.
or ADHD, and they're trying to speak in pictures. They're translating
Like,
the facts into pictures, they're processing it into pictures, and then they translate it back down into a fact. And so a lot of people are in that kind of environment, and they're kind of like, what on earth is Darius going on about? Talking about sailing again. It's like, I don't get it. Why? But you start to realize that's how they're processing and how that's how they're communicating. Anyway, I'm just sharing
well,
that
I think
because
that's a really
that's
interesting way
something
to
that
listen to.
follows the whole timeline, doesn't it?
Yeah. I was just saying, Dad, I think that's, to me, a really interesting way to receive information. When you used analogies during our conversation, I've thought, yeah, actually, it's a nice way for, I think, for most of us to understand often quite complicated ideas,
Yes. And this
isn't it?
childlike play that we're playing with these numbers, laying them all down. Let's make them into something. Let's model them out of clay. Let's go and see them out in nature. Or can we see a pattern somewhere that's, and we're exploring it, is something that people like Richard Branson and so on and other entrepreneurs are bringing to the business world, where they're trying to say, look, simplify this so that I get it quickly, because I know my clients, my customers need to get this quickly.
Yes.
Don't want lots of cognitive processing. And so often people with dyslexia are forcing us to explain it simply. And the simplest way is often as a visual metaphor or
Mm.
example. But the interesting thing is, because the story of the rabbit coming out the hole, going around the tree and coming back for the bowline, not, it's got to be accurate. It's not, and that's one of the interesting thing about these metaphors and these pictures. It's got to be accurate. It's not something, oh, random. And because we rely on them, because
Yes.
if it's
Yeah.
not accurate, that rope's not going in the right place. So we're going to ditch that metaphor until we get something that
Yeah.
reliably gets us it, because we can't fall back on automatic thinking.
And I think that's the genius of neurodiversity a lot of the time. This is
There's,
why I think neurodivergent folks have changed the world, because
yes,
these are great gifts, I think. You know,
yes,
great skill of communication to take quite complex ideas and explain them really beautifully clear, and someone say, "Ah, I get it." That's a huge gift. And if you
yes,
think of somebody like Leonardo da Vinci, I know he's often shared as one of the, somebody with dyslexia, who's, real thought leader, changed the world. that's one of his gifts, isn't it? He took what this wonderfully brilliant brain he had and all these ideas and presented it in these diagrams for early forms of flying, and so, this is a great gift. And I think it makes me think about a couple of Christmases ago, I'd watched this documentary on the TV about people who changed the world, thought leaders, and it was really interesting. And actually then with my, what I do as a day job listening, I was counting them up, and most of them, it never got mentioned in the TV show, but most of them were neurodivergent.
Yeah, yeah,
One was Leonardo da
absolutely.
Vinci,
Yeah,
Steve Jobs. So you just think, wow, this is partly, I think, where people who are neurodivergent being thought leaders, being disruptors in the best sense of that word comes into play, isn't it? I mean, I wouldn't know where to begin tying a knot, but I like the sound of what you're saying about the rabbit going around the tree. That I feel like, oh, okay, I could probably learn
yeah,
that, I think,
yeah,
actually. It's a great
yeah.
way to learn.
Yes, it is. And what tends to happen is a typical person does that 5 times, 10 times, and then they ditch the rabbit story because they've got the habit.
Yeah.
Whereas the person with dyslexia keeps doing the rabbit story for life, more or less. Okay, so let's just finish up the timeline and move on to AI, because I know I don't have you for very much longer. But so we've got dyslexia showing up early childhood, 5 years, 7 years old, 9 years old, 7 years old, it's difficulty learning to read. 9 years old, it tends to be difficulty reading to learn because comprehension
Yeah.
can be difficult. 12, 13, it's about writing down thoughts in a structured way, writing essays, writing stories. And instead of just having a stream of chatty consciousness, it's about creating a beginning, middle, and an end. Then we're at the 16-year-old where it's about the process of revision skills, study skills, how to figure out what the goal is and not just trying to tell you all the facts, but actually answering the question, the challenge of answering a question, staying to the point. Then you've got, 17, 18 years old, learning how to drive a car. Often the stick shift is really, the gearbox is quite hard, and we need a lot more time practicing and processing that. We did a podcast on that. Then we're at the sort of 20-year-old stage where it's university or there's reports to write and so on. And it's that kind of discipline of writing reports, having great ideas, new novel thinking, but then communicating that in a report that can be challenging. Then we go into the 25-year-old stage where it's a standard operating procedure. You've done this 100 times. Why are you still dropping the ball? Do you not care? That kind of phase. Then what I notice is, if you don't mind me, I'm just going to rattle through some of
No, I
this.
love it. It's fascinating.
What I notice is at the 25 to 30-year-old stage, you start to become really good at something. Okay,
Mm.
hopefully. You become really good at something, and it's often a niche specialized thing, and it makes up for you dropping the ball on some of these lower level processing stuff. And they go, that doesn't matter. Darius is great at this. Just get him on that, and so on. Then you start having children. Okay. And I've noticed, and this is interesting with the workplace stuff, is that when you're about 30s, okay, 30, 35, you've probably got a family with some children. Your strategy up until that stage has always been work harder, stay up later, use the weekends. And then you start going, oh my goodness, this is affecting my wife. This is affecting my children. I'm bringing work home, and my colleagues aren't doing that. They're playing golf, and then they're reading books and so on. And I'm like, I'm still answering emails and so on. And I'm not managing to keep up. And I don't know what's wrong, because then there's this gap. And it's normally this administrative gap. I'm spending all this time doing that. And it's at that point, they start thinking, what's wrong with me? And then someone like you and me comes along and says, look, mate, you've got dyslexia. You're not driving an automatic car, you're driving a manual car. You've got to learn how to do the gears of whatever standard operating process, report writing, tying your shoelaces, reading to write, learning to write stories, learning to study. These are all gears, and we're not automatic thinkers, we're manual thinkers. And so you need to learn those gears rather than just being stuck in first gear, going 60 miles an hour down the road in first gear and not going up the gears. And that's when access to work, workplace strategy coaching, and this kind of designing a system around your brain really comes into its own, I think. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating to hear you talk like that, Darius. I'd never thought of it in that kind of a timeline before, but yes, it does. And I think, when you're talking about, say, the early 20s and so on, in some ways that's as impactful as when we're talking about our 4 and 5 year olds going to school for the first time. Because what we'll often see at that stage of early adulthood, you get your independence. Maybe you've got your own first little, you're in halls of residence if you're at uni, or
Yeah.
maybe you've got your first apartment or whatever. Now you're going to be paying the bills and food shopping and all the independent stuff comes
Yes.
in. So alongside, as you say, jobs and keeping on top of emails, after a long day, you've got to then go and do some food shopping and go and cook and
Mm.
maybe you're going to meet friends. But it's all these things that's kind of a lots of things to juggle. And then as you
Lots of
say,
new processes,
yeah,
basically. Those are
that's right.
all new
Yeah,
processes.
because for a lot of, I think, our kids who are neurodivergent, if they've been lucky enough to have, a supportive family, families took a lot of the strain,
Yeah.
about, well, of course, for our kids, what you're going to have for your dinner. You hope someone in your family's going, when you come in, you're going to have a nice dinner that, mum, dad, granny, granddad, whoever's made for you. But then as you come into adulthood, that's something you have to take ownership of. And then, as you say, then we've got that another layer. And now I'm a parent,
Yes.
and now I've got to sort out my children. So I love what you say. I've never thought of it like this, but you're absolutely spot on. So, yeah, for a lot of adults who think, "I'll just catch up on that on Saturday morning." Well, now you're taking your kids to football or wherever on Saturday morning.
Yeah.
You can't do that
No, you
anymore.
can't. No.
Those coping strategies are breaking down.
Yes.
And I think something that's very much of the times that we're in, I was at BDA when COVID hit, and I think COVID threw a curveball for a lot of folks' coping strategies because of the
Yes.
changes that suddenly we had to have with working. So
Yes.
that was something else,
Yes.
that happens to our, things happen in life, isn't it? And the pandemic really hit a lot of neurodivergent folks. So the timers, I remember BDA has a helpline. We had people contacting at the time. In all seriousness, does COVID make your dyslexia worse? And these were
Right.
questions about that. And of
Yes.
course, we didn't know a lot about COVID then. So you're like, I don't totally know. We think not, but we don't know. But of course, now in retrospect, not biologically, but actually all the changes that was happening and that terrible strain and upheaval that we were living through, yeah, of course it's going to impact on you as on all of us, but certainly neurodivergent folks, because
Yeah.
suddenly you're working from home or you're
Yeah.
homeschooling your kids, you're worried
Well,
sick about your parent, whatever it is, it's a lot going on.
lots of reasons why. Because your working memory is being overloaded by
Yeah,
stress and anxiety. And so if you've got a smaller working memory, that even uses up less of it, and you start having more of those domino effects of low working memory and dropping the ball. But like one of the things that I realize is a lot of people with dyslexia, when it comes to time management, ADHD, time management, dyslexia, they use external visual cues that for them are very unconscious. So, for example, Mary always gets up 5 minutes before the meeting to go to the toilet, and that's a visual cue that you pick up, and oh gosh, there's a meeting. That's right, there's a meeting happening in 5 minutes. So you get up and you realize, and that's just your alarm or whatever to do it, and you're not necessarily consciously doing it. Or someone goes by and go, "Hey, Darius, you want to have a quick coffee before this is going to happen?" You go, "Oh gosh, yes, that's going to happen. That's great." Yeah, you're not saying that, but that's kind of what's
yeah,
happening. And these sort of visual cues are happening that sort of sweep you along, as it were. Whereas then you're stuck in your room on your own, and you have to have your own infrastructure of, oh,
yes,
I put a reminder, an alert on my calendar that reminds me that the meeting's going to start in 5 minutes. I'd thought of it 10 minutes beforehand. I know the meeting's happened, but I got, you know, hyper fixated on something, and time flew by, and then all of a sudden you're late for the meeting when actually you were ready for it. But all these kind of little coping strategies are taken away by
Yes.
something like that. It's fascinating. I know we're at the end of our time. There's one last thing that I wanted to talk to you about is AI. What's been your experience of AI and dyslexia so far? What are your thoughts on the impact AI is going to have on dyslexia in the future? Any insights on that?
I feel very positive about the role of AI for dyslexia and the other differences because I think that it's going to help bring down barriers. I think, like any technology, it's the wise use of technology, AI. But yes, I've certainly had people already for quite some time reach out to me about ChatGPT, for example. I listened at the dyslexia show. I know we've mentioned this a fair bit today. Listening to Michael Ramesh from Microsoft talk about Copilot. These are massive game changers to my mind, to the good, really, to help. We talked about that chatty, I don't know, 12-year-old with all these wonderful ideas about stories, just can't get it down on paper. To me, it's going to bridge that gap, really. It used wisely in its place. I'm really excited about it. I'm not the most techiest person, Darius, but I feel really excited about that piece of technology. And actually, on a bigger scale, I know a lot of our society's worried that jobs will be lost because of AI in the future. I think the next 5 years will be very, fast moving because we're going to be changing a lot in our society around technology and the impact of AI. But then we've got the other conversation that the skills that a dyslexic person or a broader neurodivergent person offers can actually, AI cannot compete with that. And it's that brilliant quote. I cannot remember where I've seen it, but it's AI aggregates and neurodiversity innovates. So on the broader scale, I feel very smug that our community will be in a good place in terms of what we can offer
I
compared
agree.
to the strengths of AI. And it's that, I think it was on Made by Dyslexia. There was this brilliant little experiment they did, and they'd asked AI to recreate the Mona Lisa, talking about Leonardo da Vinci. And what AI produced is hilarious compared to the real Mona Lisa. So
Yeah.
in those ways, I don't think we should be too scared of it. Yes, we need to have due diligence because we hear these scary things about what it potentially can do. But I think in our community, I don't think we should feel scared of it. And actually, I think we should embrace what's coming through because my goodness,
Yeah.
certainly with Copilot and so on, this is a life change. And I don't say that lightly,
Yeah.
a life
Yeah.
enhancer for
Yeah.
people.
I mean, I'm finding it a life enhancer
Yeah,
with my dyslexia, and so many of my clients are finding it just transformative. I
yeah,
believe AI in the right kind of tools will solve the challenges of dyslexia and enhance the advantages.
agreed.
I think it will teach children how to read, teach children how to tie their shoelaces, and bridge this gap. I mean, I even use AI. This is one of my techniques for using AI. I say to ChatGPT, explain this to me like I'm a 5-year-old. Okay.
Yes,
And when you ask it to explain it like a 5-year-old, it goes into metaphor mode and says, all right, this is like throwing a frisbee in the air, and then it catches the wind and it flies away over there, and then it lands, and you're like, oh yeah, I get what you're saying. And it uses a metaphor. And then what I do is I go up through the ages. I say, right, explain it to me like a 5-year-old, explain it to me like I'm a 10-year-old, explain it to me like I'm a 20-year-old at university, explain it to me like I'm an expert. And it will shift the same thing into a different language. And I go from the big picture metaphor down into the simple language of a 10-year-old, down into the jargon of a 20-year-old, and then the focused, laser targetedness of an expert. And I can go on that journey. And
brilliant.
AI is helping me do that, which is so fantastic because
Mm,
I'm telling it to speak my language.
yes, I couldn't agree more. And I love how you're using it already. What Michael from Microsoft was talking about AI and about Copilot and so on, was very similar. And he was talking about how, for example, we talked about communications a little earlier, where you will no longer in the not too distant future have to think, right, what font do I like? Right, I like a pale pink background. I like this size font. So it will just do it automatically
Yes.
because you've
Yes.
logged in and it knows you and it just will do it for
Yeah.
you. So
Yeah.
there's even just shortcuts it will do just to make
Yes.
your life easier in
Yeah.
those ways. It's very exciting. Yes, it's a change, and often as human beings, we're not great with change. We get a bit scared. But
Yeah.
I think once you see what it can offer, you just come away excited, I think, because
Yeah.
it's great for us all, I think, Darius, whether we're neurodivergent or not.
Well, in your language, it's really going to close the gap.
Yeah, yeah, close the
Well,
gap.
Donna, it's been fantastic having you on
Oh,
the
thank
podcast.
you.
Thank you for being here. What a rich talk.
I've learnt so much from you, as I always do. So
Well,
thank
no,
you.
you're being too generous. That's very kind of you. But Donna, it's been fantastic. Thank you. And look forward to meeting you at more events.
Yes, yes. And we can keep talking about that gap and how we close it,
Yeah,
Darius,
I
isn't
like
it?
it. I really want to do a graphic of that timeline, those years, and
I
how
love
the
that.
the graph.
Yeah.
That's something that's been bubbling in my mind for the last 2 years.
I
I
think
want to
that's
do that graphic,
genius.
and
Yeah,
people go, "Oh my goodness, that is true. That happened then. That
yeah,
happened then," and then you can say, "This is what's going to happen in 5 years' time." You're maybe
yeah,
25 years old. Why don't you get ready now and put
yeah,
in
yeah,
some
yeah.
of those strategies
Yeah.
before it gets stressful?
I love it. Yeah, I love it. So I can't wait to see it. So yeah.
Maybe we could figure it out together as well. So anyway, Donna,
Thank you,
thank you for your
Darius.
time. See you
My
later.
pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
This podcast is sponsored by dyslexiaproductivitycoaching.com. It's my day job when I'm not hosting this podcast. Tell me, do you know what you want to achieve in the workplace, but you're struggling with how to achieve it? Maybe you suspect some traits of dyslexia are getting in the way. Well, that's where Dyslexia Productivity Coaching comes in, because we give you a simple productivity system for your Apple devices that harnesses the creativity that comes with your dyslexia. It includes proven methods like note-taking, reminders, speech-to-text, mind mapping, and more, all tailored to your needs. It'll free up your time and help you achieve outstanding results. Book a complimentary call to discuss it with me, and if you do it soon, I may also be available to coach you personally via Zoom. So don't be shy, go to dyslexiaproductivitycoaching.com or swipe up and book it now.